Dear students, so today we will start with the next lesson in political science. The name of the lesson is International Problems. In this lesson we are going to learn what international problems the world is facing. Different problems like environmental problems, human rights, terrorism, global warming. Okay, these are all the problems which the world is facing. So let's start. Let's revise. Till the last chapter, we studied the sovereign states in the international system, India's foreign policy, and India's defense system. We learnt about all these in the previous chapters. We also studied the objectives of the United Nations. In this chapter, we are going to study some important international problems. Some problems are not restricted to any one country. That means it's not like that only one country is facing the problem. There are some other countries also facing the same problem. They affect many countries and eventually all countries of the world. These problems that affect the whole world are called international problems. In order to solve these international problems, all nations need to make joint efforts. So, in order to solve all these different type of problems, what do we need to do? We need to make joint efforts to solve these problems. So, in this chapter, we shall therefore study problems related to human rights, environment, and terrorism. Even the questions of refugees are now assuming global proportions. Hence, we shall consider this issue as well. So, the first problem we are going to learn is about human rights. Now, we have some rights that are the important rights. What are those? They are right to life, food, clothing, shelter, education, and health. These are all some kinds of rights which everyone needs to have, whether it be the rich or poor. So let's see human rights. The concept of human rights has emerged from the concept of natural rights. Natural rights are those rights that we are endowed with because we are born as human beings. Just now, as I told you, all these rights, each and every person need to have these rights. In the same vein, human rights are those rights that are necessary for living as a human being and as a constituent of society. So we are living in a society, we require all these rights. The American and the French revolutions proclaimed liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice as human rights. Liberty is we should have freedom, freedom of speech, freedom to speak whatever we feel to. Then we also should have equality, or there should not be any discrimination. Then fraternity, that is brotherhood. So we should have all these rights. The idea that in order to realize these rights, a democratic form of government is essential was strengthened. After that, several European nations adopted democratic constitutions and governments. This brought limits on the authority of the state. Now, what was the main responsibility of the state was to come or to be understood to be the protection of citizens' rights. Everyone should have their own rights. Now let's see rise of the concept of human rights in international relations. Now after the United Nations was established, that is, the United Nations was established in 1945. So after that, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was prepared. It was then adopted in the United Nations General Assembly by majority vote on 10th December 1948. So when it was adopted on 10th December 1948. Later, in 1966, The United Nations General Assembly adopted the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So later on, there were another rights, or you can say assemblies, which were held, and the internal covenant on economic, social and cultural rights. These two covenants are a part of international law. Member nations of the United Nations are bound to observe them. As I told you before, look at that yellow box. Human rights includes the important rights that are rights to life, food, clothing, shelter, education and health. The state has to see to it that these rights are available to everybody. Okay, let's move further. The question of human rights was raised in the United Nations General Assembly on several occasions during the Cold War period. Now, during that time, racial segregation in Africa was said to be against human rights. Now, what is racial segregation? Now, you know the South African countries. So, previously, there were only the rights for the whites. Now, you know, in South Africa, there are whites as well as black skinned people staying. So, only people who were white, their skin color was white, only they used to get the rights, not the other, that is the blacks. This was racial segregation. It was going on in Africa, and it was said to be against human rights. That means if any person is staying, all should get equal rights. It should not depend on the person's color, skin color. But it was there previously. Nowadays, you see, everyone are treated equally in South Africa. Okay. And hence it was decided to boycott the regime there. Freedom for colonies and insistence on the democratic system could be cited as examples of the same. In modern time, problems like struggle against racism, border disputes, terrorism, and jeopardizing human rights on a large scale. So these are certain problems, that is racism, border disputes, border issue problems, then terrorism. These are all problems that we are facing. Apart from this, the concept of human rights has broadened due to several issues of global natures like contagious disease, the threat to environment, natural disasters, etc. Human rights today also include goals like protection of the environment and sustainable development. What is sustainable development? Means each and every person should get the required resources. Okay. Let's move further to the next, that is human rights and India. Now, in the Indian Constitution, human rights have given the place of fundamental rights. The Constitution gives the responsibility of the protection of the weaker section like women and minorities. So, there are rights given to weaker sections that are the SC, ST, then women and minorities, means people who don't have lots of money or do not have good income. Okay, so government gives them some rights. In 1993, the Human Rights Protection Act was passed as per this law. The National Human Rights Commission and the State Human Rights Commission was established. The Human Rights Commission is responsible for taking cognizance of the complaints regarding violation of human rights and taking appropriate action regarding such violation. Okay, so each and every person should get rights. Now, previously we knew that women used to not get equal rights. They were not allowed to vote. Okay, but nowadays you see everyone has those rights. Let's move to the next point, that is secure environment. Now, in the present times, the concept of human rights have become broader, and it is increasingly being accepted that a secure environment is an important human right. Now, what's more important? Secure environment means in the environment where we are living, it should be secure. Now, what things should not be there? There should not be pollution or putting waste in the rivers, in the water bodies. We should not do that. Okay, so let's see further. At the international level, the awareness and needs of seeing the environment was expressed in 1970. The experts studying the environment believed that due to industrialization on a large scale and the increasing need for energy has endangered the environment. These activists celebrated the first Earth Day on 22nd April 1970. So when is the Earth Day celebrated? That's on 22nd April 1970. Now, we also know that there are certain chemical fertilizers and pesticides used in agriculture. We use a lot amount of chemical fertilizers. Why? To grow the crop faster. Then we put pesticides, but we don't know. If you put lot amount of chemical fertilizers, what happens? The quality of the soil decreases. You can't even put lots of pesticides. If you put lots of pesticides, spray lots of pesticides, even because of that, the plant might die. So we should see things that when we are doing, we should use it in a lesser amount. Then there is sound pollution due to vehicles, radiation from nuclear reactors, oil leakages. You see oil leaking in the water, in the sea, where what happens? It harms the fishes, the aquatic life. Okay. Then leakages of chemical gases makes the environment unsafe and creates various problems. So these are all the problems related to environment. As a result of this awareness, the question of environment safety began to be discussed at the international level. After the wave of globalization that started in 1990, the interdependence among nations increased, and therefore a need for nations to cooperate with each other emerged. The threat to the environment caused by pollution or by leakage of oil or gas does not remain restricted to one nation. That means this environment problem is not only faced by one country. There are other countries also facing the same problem. Also, it affects our long term. It becomes necessary for nations to act with each other's consent and cooperation in order to deal with these effects. So, to solve this problem, the country should come together. So then only the problems can be solved. The visible effects of the decline of environment are extinction of species or plants and animals. Even we see that there are certain kinds of animals and plants which are extincted, which you can't find it anymore. So we have to see about that. Decrease in the fertility of soil. Just now as I told you, if you put lot amount of chemical fertilizers, the quality of soil decreases. Then you are not able to grow crops properly. Then there is water shortage, then fluctuation in the proportion of rainfall, then there is global warming, drying up of rivers and lakes, where we have seen in certain places, that is some years back we seen in Rajasthan, the rivers are getting dried up. Then incidence of newer disease, acid rain, thinning of the ozone layer, etc. These are all the problems which we are facing. Even if some of the effects are restricted to particular nation, these problems reach global proportion. Now, there are some problems which are only related to certain nations, but then too it goes up to the global proportion. Then global proportions due to their long-term effects, while some problems are inherited of a global nature. Next, let us learn about Stockholm to Paris conference. Now, Stockholm is the capital of Sweden. Okay, in order to discuss the immediate and long-term problems related to the environment and to find solutions on them, to find different solutions, we've seen so many problems, so we have to find a solution. Then what happened? A United Nations conference was held on human environment. It was called at Stockholm from 5th to 16 June. That was in 1972. Now, what was spoken in this conference? In this conference, it was stressed that it is the responsibility of all nations to cooperate to overcome pollution. So, we should stop polluting rivers. That is how water pollution. Then stop polluting stop noise pollution, air pollution. All are these different pollutions which we are facing. The developing nations feel that the developed nations are more responsible for the decline of the environment and they should take the responsibility for stopping the decline. Even today, the developing countries take the same position. Another feature of this conference was that the non-government organizations working in the field of environmental protection were also present in that conference. The issue of the protection of the common global wealth was raised. A consensus emerged. It was the responsibility of all nations to protect these resources. Now there are certain resources which we get it in limited. So we should see towards that also, not waste those resources. Okay, use them properly. It was after this conference that the United Nations created the United Nations Environment Program, that is UNEP. Many international treaties about environments were signed after this conference. After this conference, which was held in from 5th to 16th June. After this conference, there were certain treaties signed between countries. Okay. Several rules were made about the protection of environment. It is necessary to make rules also, right? Not to pollute your environment. If there is rules made, then only people will follow. Environmental movements started on a large scale at national as well as at international level. Non-governmental organizations also assumed a bigger role in the decision-making process at international conferences regarding the environment. Then the next point is, the next stage was the environmental conference at Rio in 1992. Now this was at Stockholm. In 1972, then there was another conference in Rio, that was in 1992. In this conference, the idea of sustainable development was stressed. Different treaties regarding biodiversity, climate change due to greenhouse gases, protection of forest, etc. was signed. In 1997, then there was different other treaties being signed, or there was a conference held. In 1997, the conference at Kyoto laid down the protocols for the developed countries for preventing climate change. These were applicable for 15 years. After this, a conference on climate change was held at Paris in November 2015. An appeal was made in this conference that all nations should make concerted efforts to stop climate change and global warming, and that the developed countries should help the developing countries to acquire the technology to achieve this goal. Now, there are certain countries which are developed. So, these countries which are developed should help the developing countries. So, these were certain conferences which were held. Now, next, let us look at the point terrorism. Now, we all know that this is a major problem of our times. It is going on right now also. So, this is a major problem of our time. Several countries in the world are facing this problem. No nation is capable of countering terrorism entirely on its own. Hence, terrorism is considered to be a global problem. Hence, terrorism is considered to be a global problem. You can't just blame one country, right? There might be some other countries also into terrorism. Now, let's see what is terrorism. Terrorism is spreading fear and terror in a society by using or threatening to use violence against common and innocent people for achieving political goals. Okay, this is the meaning of terrorism. That means to harm people, to fear, to make them scared in the society, threatening them. Okay, that is creating violence for achieving certain goals. They want something, that is why they do this. Okay, let's see further. Terrorism is organized and planned violence. Okay, so it is a planning which is being done. Terrorism has made a deep and long-term impact on international politics. In the last 2 decades, terrorist conflicts appears to have intensified in different countries. That means you can't blame one country. There are other countries also into terrorism. Terrorist conflict is different from traditional war. It is absolutely different from the war. Okay, traditional war is a conflict between 2 or more sovereign states. Now, what is traditional war? A war between 2 or more countries or 2 or more states. So, traditional war is completely different. Okay. In such wars, the geographical boundaries between nations acquire importance. That is, national security is connected with geographical boundaries. On the other hand, in the case of terrorism, terrorist groups can cause violence in any part of the world from anywhere in the world. Now, what does terrorist people do? These terrorist groups, what do? They cause violence or they cause damage to the property in the country. The aim of a terrorist attack is not to endanger the geographical boundaries, but to challenge a regime in a country or refuse to acknowledge the existence of the state. This means that due to increasing terrorism, the internal security of a country is threatened in addition to its external security. Now, why do these people go into terrorist group? Because they want something. So what do? This means that due to increasing terrorism, the internal security, okay, the internal security of a country is threatened. Means you should scare people so that we can get what we need. Okay, mostly these politicians, they go into terrorist. Why? Because they want votes. So they threaten people. Okay. In order to curb terrorism, it is imperative that the security mechanisms of different nations should work in a concerted manner. So that they should work into make a planning how to stop this terrorist activist. Okay. Next, let us move on to the problems of the refugees. People who have to leave their motherland against their wishes or are forced to go to other nations seeking refuge or for security are called as refugees. People become refugees due to torture or persecution for belonging to a particular race or religion, due to war or a disaster, etc. So there are certain people facing problems. In such situations, people are forced to leave their own country and seek shelter in another country. Now, what is a refugee? A refugee is where people are forced to leave their motherland and go to another place or go to another country. Okay. Before the Second World War, the Jews were tortured in Germany. Their citizenship and property was confiscated. That means taken. The Jews' property was taken. That is, the Jews were tortured in Germany. In 1971, the people in East Pakistan turned refugees and came to India seeking refuge due to political and religious persecution. In the last few years, due to the war-like situation in Iraq and Syria, a lot of people are leaving Syria as refuge. We can cite many such examples of refugees. We can see so many examples of these refugees where people are forced to leave their own country and go and settle in some other country, which is wrong. When people of any country are forced to leave their own countries as refugees, they have to face many problems, right? If you're forced to leave your home and go and stay somewhere, they have to face so many problems, right? They lose their own homes. The most important problem is to decide where to go. They don't know actually if they are going to leave their country, they don't know where they have to go next. And will that nation give us shelter? Then another question arises that will that country give us shelter over there? Or will they also hunt us from there? So these are certain problems which arise. These are the questions that they face. Secondly, they have to also take along with them other members of their family. Means they can't go alone. They have to take the children, if they have their parents, right? They have to take everyone and settle over there. It involves a lot of physical and emotional stress. So they don't know what to do. A lot of stress comes upon them. Apart from this, there are problems caused by natural elements like heat, rain, storms, as well as shortage of food, sickness, an enemy in pursuit, etc. So these are certain kinds of problems. If they have to leave their home during the rainy season, where will they get shelter, right? They need to have a home. So these are certain kind of problems which they face. If they don't have a home, where will they get food from? Where can they store their food? Okay, so these are all the problems which arises and they face a lot of stress. In this process, many people lose their lives. Absolutely, they will lose their life if they don't have a home, if they don't get proper food to eat, right? Once the refugees reach a safe place, they have new challenges. Once they have got place over there, also they have to face certain problems. They need to find work. That's more important. Otherwise, how will they survive? A place to live and other problems of a day-to-day nature. If the language and culture in the other nation are different, then adjusting to that possesses a difficulty. If their language is different and the place where they are gone, that is different, then it becomes difficult to communicate with people over there. So there are so many problems. There is no assurance that the people in the nation which give shelter to the refuge will accept them. Will they accept them? That another question arises. On the contrary, as the number of refugees increase, the strain on the economic of the host nation increase. A shortage of essential goods is created. There may be an increase in crime or even inflation. The locals may lose their jobs, a problem of law, and other may crop up. Many such problems may emerge. It's not only one problem they have to face. So many different kinds of problem arise. Due to this problem, many nations are not ready to give shelters to refugees and to resettle them. Because of this so many kind of problem, the other countries also do not give them shelter. Okay. In 1951, some provisions were made regarding the question of refugees at the international level. One such provision was that the refugees will not be forcibly sent back to their country against their wishes. Similarly, an office of the High Commissioner of the United Nations has been established to solve their problem. Then slowly they started solving their problems. If all nations safeguarded and fostered human rights, exploitation and violence would reduce. That means if all nations will follow the rights, then what happens? Violence and exploitation against anyone would get reduced. All people will be able to achieve their own development, safety and securely. Human rights can be more effectively implemented if the environment is safeguarded and if terrorism is completely wiped out. Right? If terrorism is completely wiped out, what happened? You will be able to live in peace, in security, in safety. Okay? No group of people will have to become refugees. Okay? If they will not be hunted from their own country, then no one will be called as a refugee. For this, all nations have to come together, cooperate with each other, take concrete action and bring about actual change. We need to change certain things. Okay, then only our country will be a developing country. Next year, we shall study how India has progressed in this direction. So here we end with this chapter. We will learn the next chapter in the next video. Thank you for listening, children. Goodbye. Take care.